Hello and welcome to MySecurity TV and our Tech and Sec Weekly. My name's Chris Cubbage. I'm the Executive Editor with MySecurity Media, and this is our Friday morning episode. We're going to be diving into cloud networking first up and the transformation or the transforming your journey to Azure. And this is our second interview with Alkira. Our first one was with Atif, the CTO, but now we're going to be joined by Amir Khan, the President, CEO and Founder with Alkira. And they've now entered the Microsoft Startups program. So looking forward to speaking to Amir. And then we're going to come, well, that's in San Jose. And then we're going to come back to Australia and in Canberra and looking at the climate security threat and the recent announcement and the launch of the Australian Security Leaders Climate Group. And these are former defence leaders sounding the alarm on climate change and national resilience. We're going to be joined by former or retired Air Vice-Marshal John Blackburn AO, and he's the former Deputy Chief of the Royal Australian Air Force. So quite a diverse episode today, but it's good to be crossing over to the US, looking at some advanced technology and cloud platforms, and then we can spend a little bit of time talking about climate security climate change and national security in that context. So we cover on aerospace and space, defence and national security, cybersecurity and critical technology, and cities and infrastructure. We are streaming on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook. And let me just take a quick opportunity to double check those. We've had a little bit of issues in the past, and we'll see how we go. I'll let that warm up and let it stream through. But otherwise, if you happen to be listening, please press like, let us know where you're listening from, and also what I should be understand. But if you're listening on LinkedIn, let me know. Press like, and that'll let me know that everything's working. Just to catch up on what we've been doing, last Tuesday, we looked at regulation technology and breach manager reporting platform, which was released with Gaydon's lawyers, and we crossed to Queensland for a chat to Liam Hennessy, who's a director with Gaydon's. And then we crossed back, I think, to Sydney with Ron Gauci, the Chief Executive Officer, who is with the Australian Information Industry Association, and their call for at least $250 million worth of funding for a national artificial intelligence strategy for Australia. And again, good to catch up with Ron. Last Friday, we were joined by Anthony Stevens of 6 Clicks and their IRAP protected certification. So they now have 6 Clicks for government. And then we crossed, Dr. Habib Rahman was also in Sydney, and he is with the Director Asia Pacific with Iconics, and they are the platform for Mitsubishi Electric and their renewed SCADA lineup. So both very good interviews and good insights into that type of technology. And it was a good segue into our SCADA and industrial control systems cybersecurity courses that we're running. We've done now 6 sessions with Daniel Ehrenreich. We've got 2 more to go, and those sessions will be available to download and purchase on modules. We are continuing to promote our top women in security ASEAN region, Southeast Asia, and the 10 nations of ASEAN. We're just hitting 50 nominations now. So if you know women in security in the region, encourage them or nominate them to get involved. And our cybersecurity weekly podcasts that's still there. So these episodes are available. Please check out the Cyber Risk Leaders magazine and Why 5G Matters cover feature. And thank you very much to RSA and the RSA Secure ID Suite for their sponsorship, and also ALC for their certified courses in cybersecurity. And it does cut back to that IRAP protection. You need one of those, or at least 2 of those certifications to get involved as an IRAP assessor. And if you want to support the channel, check out mysecuritytv.shop. And our Cyber War series. So that's enough from me. And without further ado, I'm going to bring on Amir Khan, the President, CEO, and Founder of Alkira in San Jose. Amir, thanks for joining us. Audio issue.
Thank you so much for having me on the show.
There you go. Thank you.
Thanks.
Amir, we spoke to, and I was going to put the chat last time, we spoke to Atif Khan, your brother, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and which, I take it to your elder brother?
Yes, I am.
Oh, no, I was suggesting that Atif was the elder one, but I don't actually know that. But you've got quite an esteemed background. I'm going to put that YouTube link in there. If you happen to be listening, let me know just to make sure that we've actually got our streams working. Introduce, I think, the audience to Alkira first off, and it's quite a unique startup as well. And then I think we also need to touch a little bit about your background, so people get a sense of your pedigree, I suppose, in this space. You've formerly sold companies off to Cisco, and you've held leadership roles with Cisco. So yeah, Alkira and where you're at. Last time we spoke to you was December last year. You just finished your Series B funding.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me on the show here. So let me start with introducing Alkira. Alkira was founded in 2018 on two fundamental principles. One is that the cloud is growing enormously and has almost infinite amount of resources, and many different companies are formed in the cloud, right? Born in the cloud. And they were scaling to enormous numbers, like Netflix, grew to hundreds of millions of subscribers. And so starting to look at that, there are great raw capabilities available in the cloud. So why can't we utilize that to build computer networks going forward as well? The second thing was, as we started to talk to customers, they were struggling to adopt the cloud. And the biggest hindrance in adoption was the complexity of the network. Even in a single cloud, the constructs, the details, the customer had to understand and build the infrastructure themselves. They had to stitch things together manually, whether it was virtual routers or virtual instances of firewalls, and how the policy got constructed, or you could not even do segmentation or proper integration with the hybrid environments. And then you start to look at multiple clouds. It was exponentially complicated because every cloud is different. There's no standardization, right? So we embarked upon this journey with the customer feedback that this was a great opportunity to transform the whole market. So we started focusing on solving the multi-cloud problem by creating a unified infrastructure across all clouds and your hybrid environments. And then we continued to expand beyond that after the launch. And now we cover pretty much end-to-end connectivity, right? As the cloud grows, we grow, because we are born in the cloud company offering services not only to multiple clouds, but also for traditional solutions like backbone services or remote users or on-premise locations through direct connectivity, or solutions like SD-WAN. So it's a very comprehensive solution. I'll go into a lot more detail in this podcast.
So basically, you would come to Alkira first before you start that journey, and then you can bring in whatever cloud platform. You provide that sort of the backbone, and as you say, that you've now got that full suite. So you are sort of that single pane of glass approach, and then you can manage those multiple clouds. So you could be running a server in one environment and the operating system and virtual machines in another cloud environment as well, right?
Yeah. So our solution is called Cloud Services Exchange, and it comprises of what we call these virtual constructs, cloud exchange points. It is a completely as a service offering, which is the first in the history of computer networking, where you come to our portal and consume it like any other SaaS application. Once you log in, you get to this map, global map, and you can select the regions where you want to deploy the cloud exchange points. Again, these are virtual entities. Once you do that, we automatically create connectivity between all those regions at high speed, low latency across multiple clouds. And you can create segmentation, whether it's based on your internal departments, or if you have multiple different companies that you offer services to and you want to be able to charge back to them, we allow those capabilities. So you create multiple segments, and then you give us the credentials for your cloud environment. We pull down all the VPCs or VNets in case of AWS or Azure, and allow you to map those through full routing and segmentation into this environment without you knowing anything about the underlying details of the cloud. So now you can focus on instantiating your instances or storage endpoints in the cloud, or databases, etc. Right? So you have seamless connectivity across clouds without knowing much about how networking works in those clouds. Now, having said that, we have power users, right, like large enterprises who are very detail oriented and who need visibility and a lot of control from routing perspective, right? And we provide that. So all the visibility, compliance, governance capabilities are built in. You have a very strong policy infrastructure overlaid on top of the solution. You have complete visibility into what applications are running, and if you want to define policies based on, whether people can watch Netflix or YouTube during certain part of the day, or what you want to restrict that traffic to, you have the capability to do that.
So you can push policy all the way through and into different cloud environments as well.
Yes, in ubiquitous manner, right? It's one way of doing things across all clouds, which is what the customers are struggling with it today, right? And that's why multi-cloud environments were not accommodated. People were focusing on putting everything in one cloud, although they knew that they could run, as an example, certain Microsoft applications better in Azure, right, versus AWS, or certain applications better in AWS in case they were the Microsoft customer. So now there's more awareness that solution like ours exists out there, and customers are starting to rethink how they deploy the multi-cloud environment.
And can you go down to, say, micro-segmentation as well? Yes. And that would obviously be within that cloud environment or from Alkira itself?
Yeah. So as you create segments, what we call the VPNs, you have the ability to tag what resources need to be part of this micro-segmentation. So within those segments, you can create micro-segments and define policies as to how that traffic flows or who can communicate with which resource. So it's very powerful.
So it's, from a policy perspective, you can sort of implement privileged access management approaches, that zero trust approach as well, and just push that through. And are you, is Alkira doing that, or are you overlay services to provide that framework, or is Alkira able to do that? So are you kind of replacing, because I think from a cybersecurity context, are you replacing some of the vendors out there in terms of what they offer?
So it depends upon what type of a service. So let's take an example of, identity management services. We can integrate with Okta or some other, technologies like that. When it comes to remote access, right, we can bring in remote users in a very flexible manner, and they get automatically connected to the closest cloud exchange point that we offer, right? And this is all done drag and drop by the customer in minutes, right? And so remote users working from home can come into this environment, and they go through the same stringent policy or security that the rest of the environment goes through, right? Whether it's multiple resources in multiple clouds or on-premise locations. So it's one way of doing things across your whole end-to-end connectivity. And that's something that the customers have not seen before, without downloading any type of software or without buying any hardware. It is as a service, and that's a first in the industry. And we are very proud of the team to be able to accomplish that.
Pure cloud native in that context. Okay, so last time you'd raised a hell of a lot of money. You and your brother know how to raise money. It was a crazy amount. How much was it? On the top of my head, it was 20 odd million.
Well, we have gone through 2 rounds of funding, right? First one was about $22 million from Sequoia and Kleiner primarily, and then Google Ventures came in, and then the second round was led by Coke Disruptive Technologies.
That's correct. Yeah, and they've deployed it too, correct? They've deployed Alkira. They're a client.
Right. And that was the fascinating thing for us, right? That the client was so impressed, right? Coke is one of the most complicated environments. They are like a mini service provider where they have many internal organizations. Over many, many years, they have acquired many companies like Molex or Georgia Pacific or some high-tech companies like Infor. And, so at least they have 20 to 25 internal organizations which have their own infrastructure. And then there is a centralized organization called Coke Global Services, which offers services to all these internal organizations as well as their own infrastructure. So you can imagine how complicated that environment is, spread across 70 different countries with 700 locations, right? And so we had partnered with them when I had founded Viptela, right? They used the SD-WAN solution from us. And so in case of cloud, they were very early adopters, primarily in AWS initially, right? And they had gone through two phases of deployment. One was in the co-location facilities owned by the likes of Equinix, where they brought in their data centers to connect to those co-location facilities. And from there on, they connected to the clouds over what we call the direct connect at high speeds, right? So their data centers were connected to the cloud. Now that merely brings you to the edge of the cloud. What happens inside the cloud when you have to build a complicated infrastructure inside the cloud, when you have hundreds of VPCs and you want to interconnect them and create policy? That was all done in the second phase, where they had to manually stitch together everything. And imagine, these guys call it the spaghetti mess that they created, right? And because it was becoming so complicated, day two operations, the troubleshooting was becoming a nightmare. It was all static policies, static interconnection of tunnels to, stitch all of these things together. So when they came to us, they already had envisioned an as a service model. And they came to us very early in our journey and started working with us. So as a matter of fact, they were instrumental in helping us shape our solution to make it enterprise class. Very early testers. In the first meeting when we had with them, I remember we were sitting in Reno, Nevada, in a small conference room. I was not there, but my brother and some of the other team members were there. And within an afternoon, when we did a proof of concept of kind of a demo initially, what they had taken almost 2 years to build, right? The first phase was about 18 months, right? Planning and deployment of the hardware and software. And then DIY approach took another 6 months or so. We replicated that in 4 hours. Right? So they were blown away by that, how comprehensive the solution was. And, so now we are proud to say that we are deployed in their infrastructure. And they were so impressed, and they said that, this would be needed by every enterprise. And so they decided to lead the Series B, which was $56 million.
Yeah, I knew it was a crazy amount. Okay. Yeah, and I hope you've still got some left over, because that was only less than 6 months ago.
Right. So we are very conservative with our, with how we spend money. We try to take care of our employees from benefits and, pay perspective. We take care of them very well, but we try to avoid unnecessarily spending money. And we focus on customer satisfaction and delivering the best solution in the industry. We are passionate about our customers, and we support them very well. That's why they trust us as a small company. Otherwise, for a company like Coke to trust a startup is a big challenge, unless they have worked with that team and they have, the team has built the trust and earned their, respect.
Well, then talk us through the latest announcement with Azure. And interestingly, this is like our third Microsoft Azure type interview where we keep coming back to Azure as that central platform. I mentioned the SCADA lineup with Mitsubishi Electric. That's all built in Azure as well. So yeah, where are you at with the Microsoft startup program? And even in terms of being a startup, you're quite a rapid startup in terms of that funding you've already had. So you're gonna have to go global and scale extremely quickly. But the platform you've got allows you to do that. So how is Microsoft Azure and the journey to Azure going to be a bit of a game changer for you?
Yeah, and as you may have heard, right, I mean, from the overall compute perspective, maybe less than 5% of the overall global resources are sitting in the public clouds, right? And it's already an enormous, business, right? Whether it's AWS or Azure or GCP or others like Alkira Cloud or Tencent or Oracle or IBM, et cetera, right? And it's growing very fast. But the problem is that the network is hindering the progress, right? Or the pace at which we can adopt the clouds because things are so complicated. So Microsoft, when they came to us, they saw us as an enabler or as a company that allows the industry to accelerate adoption of the cloud, which is huge coming from a company like Microsoft, the enormity that they have. And everybody knows that, AWS was the first one in the cloud, and Azure has caught up very quickly. And, and majority of our customers, they want multiple clouds. And without fail, every single customer that we are working with is asking for Azure also, right? So we help not only accelerate cloud adoption, we also accelerate the adoption of Azure in those environments. So let's say you are an AWS customer, right? And you want to put some workloads which are optimized for like, Active Directory or certain, desktop services, and they also run cheaper or less expensive in Azure. So we make it a very simple process to adopt Azure. And I was on a call with Matt Hogue from Koch Industries today, who's their CTO, and he was describing how when they wanted to add Azure to their infrastructure with Alkira, it took a couple of hours, right? Within a day or two of testing, they had that environment up and running, which would have taken them months of planning and deployment. So very proud to say that the solution is in production with many large customers and small customers.
Is it creating a bit of, is this good for the cloud environments? Creates a bit of competitiveness amongst the cloud platforms if customers can just start to swap around? And is it going to potentially put pressure on pricing and those types of services as well? Or do you think it's just that multi-cloud environment that is going to be normal moving forward?
I think the multi-cloud environment is going to be fairly normal moving forward. People don't want to bet all their, put all their eggs in one basket. And you may have heard the OVH news in Europe where, there was a fire that caused a lot of people to lose their data. And that can happen in certain environments. And most of the cloud environments are built fairly reliably, but once in a while something disastrous happens, and you lose a lot of important information. And for that purpose, people are starting to realize that they need to be in multiple clouds. And also from the cloud backbone perspective, they want to make sure that there is redundancy in the backbone as well, right? So from connectivity perspective, so it's important, I think, in the industry that people move to multi-cloud environment. Without fail, as I said, every single customer, even if they are in one cloud, are coming to us and saying that we need to move into multiple clouds. I've never talked to a customer who said that I have a single cloud strategy, right?
Even though the cloud providers will say, no, we're 99.9%, it's all okay. But and that's kind of what the point of my question was. A platform like an exchange from Alkira allows you to create a bit of resiliency and redundancy, particularly even in just as simple as storage, and in terms of your backups, you can now have a sort of a multi-cloud backup strategy.
Right. And because interconnection of clouds and going between clouds is made so easy. Again, Koch does some testing and they were public with those numbers where they ran applications between Microsoft Azure and AWS. And that they saw that even the latency was very manageable, right? So they call it the data gravity issue, where data needs to reside closest to the application.
Yeah.
And so they were starting to build applications in a single cloud and started to realize that in microservices can be built across clouds as well. So people are starting to experiment with more and more with the distributed applications as we move forward. And that's another avenue that opens up with the technology evolution, right? So as you bring technology to the market, that people will adopt it and they would use it to the best of their abilities, right?
And you're making it easier to use, as you say. You don't need to have a sort of an engineering sort of degree to build the stack on premise. You can just click a button and move icons around. Yeah.
And that's the challenge, George, right? So a lot of times what people do is they make it simple and then they don't provide enough capabilities, right? Or they make it so hard and there are tons of capabilities, but then the enterprises are struggling with adopting those solutions because it takes months or years. So the approach that we have taken is keep it very, very simple, but at the same time give control to the enterprises. So if it is a novice user, they can just come in and they can start deploying and get up and running very, very quickly. But if it is an expert user, they have total control over that environment. And that's the beauty of the solution, is that all that knowledge of 30 to 35 years that we have built in the networking industry. I mean, we are pre-internet service providers, right? Yeah. There used to be no service provider. And I still remember writing code for, displaying the status of the ARPANET and stuff like that, right, in the 80s when I was going to school. And, from that, we have evolved to where we are, right? There used to be intra-company networks, and then we started interconnecting them, and we started to see the internet service providers come up. So we've worked with enterprises from the beginning, and we've also worked on the service providers side from the beginning. So there are very few teams who have that pedigree of working at companies like Cisco in very, very early days and building out the largest networks in the world and going through that experience to what works and what doesn't work. Right? And then continuing to learn new technologies and bringing that mix of old and new together. Right? Today, I was, it's fascinating, right, for me, because I was on a call with a customer who's very sharp, right, and who knows the internet inside out. And we started joking about, Novell IPX or IBM SNA, and he was like, "Pardon me, guys, but I don't even remember. Oh, I don't even know what you're talking about." Right? So that's the history that we bring to the table, right? And
yeah. Well, I was about to say, you've even been with Juniper and the like. You understand.
Yes.
You basically you've got that. You're in a really nice sweet spot, really, given your background, and you have a really deep knowledge of where you've come from, where networking has come from, and you've also had that foresight. You kind of know where it was going to. And you've had that opportunity to leapfrog, and you couldn't have a better client than, as you mentioned, with someone like Coca-Cola that had that scale need.
I just want to make a quick correction. Coke Industries, not Coca-Cola.
Coke Industries, I beg your pardon. Sorry, Coke Industries. Right? I was just going to say Coke, and then I thought I better get the name right, so I got it wrong in the end. But in terms of that customer there, it makes all the difference when you've got it, and you've built it from the customer's perspective as well. So look, it's a great story. What is now the roadmap and the startup program? What does that actually involve, the startup program with Microsoft? Is it some training, workshopping, or is it just allowing you to get to front of mind for customers at their end?
So Microsoft partners with many startups, but they have a special program which is for a handful of startups, right? Which benefit them in, just like we are bringing mutual benefit to the table, right? We are helping accelerate cloud adoption and adoption of Azure, right, by the customers. So they have a handful of startups in that program, and we are the only cloud company as a part of that program. And there are many benefits of joining that program, and they're very selective, right? So they help you in many different ways to scale the company, to bring the solution to more of their customers. So there's a go-to-market, technology integration, and vision and discussions on where we are going to take the cloud industry. So we are very proud of the team that we were able to convince such such mature companies with so much credibility in the market. And by the way, we are cloud agnostic, right? So we're working with all cloud providers, and that's the beauty, because we want to serve the customer. We don't necessarily want to bring out a solution which caters to one partner or another. We want to create an ecosystem which works ultimately in the benefit of the customer.
Yeah, and that must be a challenge as well. Those, as you say, you're working with customers, and then you're agnostic as well, which creates another challenge. I hope that background's not coming through. I'm getting some idiots drilling above me, so hopefully that's not coming through.
No,
but look, Amir, thank you so much. We've kind of just running out of time. My last question to you is, what's your exposure currently here in Asia Pacific and Australia? Have you got any representations or partners here yet?
Yes, proud to say that we have our first employee in Australia.
Oh, nice. Here in Sydney?
Yes. Yes, he is in Sydney. So, he used to work with us at Viptela also. And so decided to join us. And he's working with the customers there. And hopefully soon we can announce some customers in Australia as well. So, yeah, we are looking forward to expanding into Australia. We love to visit it. We are cricket fans and tennis fans.
There you go, yeah. Khan, the surname Khan gives it away, mate, I'm afraid. So
yeah. Squash fans, yeah.
Beautiful.
As a matter of fact, Artif was one of the best amateur players in the US in squash, right? So
there you go. No, definitely high achievers. Absolute pleasure talking to you again. We'll stay with you on the journey. And as that note there says, transform the journey to Azure. It's one of the cloud platforms that Alkira is available on. And they've just entered the Microsoft for Startups program. So Amir Khan, President, CEO and founder of Alkira there in San Jose. Thank you very much for joining us and look forward to speaking to you again.
My pleasure, George. Thank you so much.
Okay. All the best. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay, let me just get our slides. It looks like we've got another issue with LinkedIn again today for whatever reason. So the LinkedIn stream didn't work, and but that's okay. We'll put that up. Let me just sort out my captions. And from cloud networking to almost cloud related, but climate security threat related and national security. And I'm going to bring on Air Vice-Marshal John Blackburn AO, retired, and the former Deputy Chief of the Royal Australian Air Force, now with the Australian Security Leaders Climate Group. John, pleasure to have you on.
G'day, Chris. Good to talk to you.
And John, this was released this week. You've officially announced and formed the Australian Security Leaders Climate Group. And having had a look at the website and the work that you've done with your colleagues, very impressive. You've obviously there's been a lot of planning and thought put into this over many years, I'd imagine. If you could maybe introduce the ASLCG, and then I think when you do that, your background will be highlighted as well.
Yeah, certainly, Chris. Look, over the past couple of years, a whole group of us have been working in a range of think tanks on a whole different issues. And what we were concerned about is that when we talk about climate change and these risks, it's such an emotional discussion out there, often derogatory, and it's so political.
Yeah.
This is too important to leave the discussion of the risks and what we should do just to slang it off at each other. So what we thought is if we got a group together of people, both civil and military background, from defence and the national security areas, emergency services, and said, look, let's have a rational, apolitical discussion about the risks. What are we facing now? What is it that we should be preparing for? Because regardless of whatever we do with emissions, this next 10 or 15 years of climate change is already predetermined according to the scientists. It's the result of what's happened in the last couple of decades. So do we want to wait to react to each climate-induced crisis over the next decade? Or wouldn't it be a good idea to do what militaries do, which they have a thing called preparedness? Let's think about the risk, work out what we need to do. Now, that doesn't mean the emissions discussion is not important. It is critical. But whatever we do in this next decade for emissions is going to affect the following decades, not the real problem that we're going to face on the ground here in Australia and around the world in the next decade.
So there's a few layers in this, and it is a complex issue, and maybe that is why it is government is struggling, it seems. But there's been a number of esteemed leaders, I would say, both from the Australian National University, former defence as well, but political leaders calling for a national security strategy or a national resilience strategy. And it's not new. I find it frustrating because I see it like, I can't refer to a national security strategy when we deal out just doing a Tech and Sec weekly. Where do we fit in terms of a national strategy? What do we refer to? And then we've got climate, which is slightly left of field. There's always been that bit of the debate: is it security related,
absolutely,
and the like, and is it more emergency services related and others? So, what's your strategy, I suppose, other than the leaders group?
Yes.
And advocate? Do you have a broader strategy or how you're going to roll this out? This isn't just a week one-off announcement. This is an ongoing piece of work.
The group we're doing right now is a particular group we've brought together to look through the lens of climate change and to focus that in a particular narrative and discussion. But for the last decade, after I finished as the Deputy Chief, I was still in the reserve for about a following decade, but I've been involved with a lot of think tanks from the Australia Strategic Policy Institute as a council member. I've been chair of other think tanks, deputy chair of others that dealt with everything from the military issues all the way through to national security. When we formed the Institute for Integrated Economic Research, I'm the chair of that now, we were trying to look much broader, and we said, let's think about our resilience as a nation. How resilient are we? what risks are coming at us and how are we addressing those? What things are we not addressing? Now, climate is one part of that and the whole environment. But on the national resilience front, we said, look, let's look at everything that's going to come at us. And it's interesting, you raise the point of a national security strategy. We had one in 2013, and I, as a reservist, was involved in some of the workshops run by Attorney Generals that helped build it. And Julie Gillard, when she was Prime Minister, tabled it. Not bad. It's not as broad as I think it should be, but it's got a lot of good thoughts in it. But when Tony Abbott came in as Prime Minister, he basically did a burnt earth or scorched earth sort of approach, just threw it out. So today, we still don't have a endorsed national security strategy. We have a defense strategy and we might have a foreign affairs strategy, but it's all stovepipe. So just think of this. You're going to build a house. And so you go and contract an electrician, a plumber, a brickie, a chippy, a whole bunch of people. And you say, we're building the house at this address, off you go. There is no plan for this, but don't worry about it because we've got technology coming along and we haven't set what date we want the people there. Look, just turn up and it'll work out in the end. And you go, well, that's crazy. But that's exactly what we're doing. And in the last couple of months, here's another $1 billion for a sovereign missile capability. And here's $500 million for this. Energy policy is pretty much banal. We're about to lose the last of our refineries in the next year or two. And then, for example, we will be 100% dependent on fuel from foreign-owned companies, and in some cases, government-owned companies, coming to Australia on foreign-owned ships because we don't have any Australian flag ships that can move it. So think about that. That's a huge security risk. We have no plan or policy to deal with it because the government trying to keep the last 4 refineries operating with an offer last year didn't work. But there's no forward plan now. So all these things together really make us vulnerable not only to conventional military threats, but interruptions in how the world works. We saw what COVID did to us with supply chains and health and everything else. Well, what we think is things like climate change. It's not just about warming temperatures and worse weather effects and disease. Imagine if the global supply chains were fundamentally interrupted as the result of climate change. A dust storm in the Suez Canal the other day blocked it for a week when somebody ran aground. But imagine that getting worse.
Yep.
What does that do to our way of life in Australia and our security? And that's why it's not just a weather issue, it's the security of our nation and way of life.
Do you think part of the problem, and look, I agree with you, and I've got 2 points. One is there's still a lot of criticism, and I looked at the Facebook page for the group, and there's you to start talking about climate change on Facebook and interesting conversations and interesting comments nonetheless. Do you think part of that problem is if they actually did a strategy, the gaps are pretty glaring and maybe they don't want to face a bit of reality on where Australia actually is?
Yeah.
And is in doing that, is it potentially highlighting some of our own vulnerabilities and weaknesses that maybe we don't want to push out there? So there's that sort of natural resistance to facing a bit of the truth, and then also some of the other sort of criticisms I hear is, oh, hang on, you're either left or right, and you're taking a political view, which And I was going to ask, where would you guys potentially position yourselves on that? You see yourselves as apolitical?
Absolutely.
Or would you admit that you moved to left or the right, or you think it's irrelevant?
Well, the fundamental principle we're trying to do on this is we will remain apolitical. This shouldn't be a political issue. It should be a national security issue that affects all Australians and our regional neighbours. Myself, most of my military career, I was voting for Liberal, but after John Howard left and we started to see what was going on with the Rudds and then Abbotts and the others, I said to my Liberal politician colleagues, I can't vote for you anymore. I've still got problems with Labor as well. Both sides of politics are fundamentally broken. Yep. Now, there are individual politicians who are really good, well-intentioned and trying to do it, but the system has become, I think, outdated. So basically, since the time of Rudd, neither side of politics has done any really forward-thinking, brave policy making. If you go back in the economic sense and you look at Hawke, Keating and Howard governments, so both sides of politics did some really brave policy economic decisions. They were hard. The last one's Howard with GST. If they hadn't done that, the chances of us getting through the global financial crisis would have been very, very, very different to what happened. But there were some hard decisions taken. And there's some excellent analysis of this done by Treasury papers that we've based our analysis on. But since that time, it's like everything's internally focused. We had a decade of stabbing each other in the back, and now it's all about the next election. You can't deal with the large, complex challenges that we're facing in the world today by focusing on the election next year, because what it means is a success for the current political system is winning the next election. It's not the best outcome for our country.
Well, it's not the first. Well, sorry to interrupt. It's not the first call. Professor Rory Metcalf, John Blackburn, and Jim Nolan. So I am getting a sense that this is kind of building up the discussions. Everyone's seeing this. Certainly, anyone who looks in this domain is asking for. It doesn't matter what it's called. They're all kind of asking for a very similar thing. Were you? Was this group already been formed? How long has this group been in formation for? As you say, there's think tanks, but is this a sort of just this 2021, or has this been in a formation for a while?
Well, the network that we know each other. I mean, Chris Barry, previous CDF, has been out really pushing this issue largely by himself, along with a lot of academics for the last decade. But in 2019, we started to say, look, why don't we have more retired defence or national security civilians out there in the public debate? It's quite different. If you look at America, for example, or even parts of the UK, you have these people participating in that debate. And there was a reluctance. There's something about our culture with retired military. Well, I'm not going to go in public. So we said, we've got to do something about this, because we want a part of the argument to be placed that is not connected to either side of politics. And so those discussions started in 2019. And as we went through last year to seeing what we do, because setting something like it takes up a fair bit of time, we've got over 30 people in it at the moment. That will grow. Because we're doing this pro bono, it does take a fair bit of time to set these things up. So yeah, it's not an overnight decision.
Well, look, I've put the website. It's aslcg.org to go and have a look. And you mentioned who's behind that. That's the former Chief of the Defence Force, Professor Admiral Chris Barry. Then you've also got the former, that's you. Then the former Australian Army Officer, Major Michael Thomas, and the former Defence Department Director of Preparedness and Mobilisation, Adjunct Associate Professor Cheryl Durant. Now, Cheryl's an interesting one too. This is what she was working on in the Department of Defence.
Yes.
So, if anyone knows it, it'll be someone like Cheryl. So what is the strategy? What is the main call from the Australian Security Leaders Climate Group? Okay. What's your time frame, or and your advocacy? We'll see more of you, and maybe where will we see more of you?
Well, you see everything's leading up to the COP conference at the end of the year, and there's a series of events that will be happening right globally. So what we said is we launched this week because we knew the Biden administration was coming out with their statements. So if we step back from just climate and think about resilience writ large, what we're arguing in our overall resilience work is the very most important thing to have up front is an honest discussion about what the risks are, and have that shared discussion, not being pushed by either side of politics. Otherwise, you'll get what happened with the PM the other night when he denigrates the other side of politics. They're all in coffee bars or wine bars and coffee shops, and the little hobbits or something. That's pointless discussion. It's really juvenile. So what we're saying, number one, let's have an open, honest conversation of what the risks are. It's difficult to have that from within a political party because they'll often spin it. So number one, let's do a thorough risk assessment that's transparent. Let's put it on the table what the problem is. And let's learn from the pandemic, by the way, and listen to science, because that's what saved our necks, was when we took the science advice, closed the borders, took control. Now, if we can get that picture together, and we'll be doing a bit of that ourselves using a lot of the research that everybody else has done, but we want to build a community that says, hang on, this is what we think the problem is. Number two, you can't ever fix any of these issues just by yourself. It can't be just the government or the opposition. It's a team effort, and that team effort is going to be a challenge because it's governments, it's industry, it's the unions, community groups. It's not just Australia, it's how do we do it with the region. We have to team with New Zealand to help with the Pacific Islands, and it's so obvious. So who's the team we need to do it? And then thirdly, if we're going to build our resilience, of which climate is a key part, you'll know there's no verb associated with the word resilience. The verb is prepare, and it's associated with the military concept of preparedness. Yep. So with the military, you have all the equipment and stuff, but you do so much training and scenario analysis, and you look at all these scenarios and go, how do I prepare that if that scenario happens, I'm ready to do it? So preparedness has readiness and sustainability models. What we want to do is take that model, that idea, and apply it to our society as a whole. Situational awareness, what's the problem? Let's be honest about it. Who has to work together to fix it? Can't do this without industry. That's the key one. Thirdly, what are we actually going to do? Well, we're going to prepare. You can prepare for the next time a major weather event happens, bushfires, whatever. But the next part of it is you have to adapt to the reality of a changing world. So in the next 10 years, we're going to have to change a whole bunch of things. Don't build houses in the middle of a national park with a single road in and out, one example. But we've got to start thinking what else we have to change of our society works as we do energy transitions and other things that will help the climate problem by reducing emissions. And then the other thing we have to do is think about, can we prevent this getting any worse? But, that's about a 2-decade decision cycle. And that's where a lot of the work on emissions reduction has to have an effect in that period. So that's the model we want to apply. We will get on and try and prompt this discussion. There's a lot of people trying to do it. We want to take it.
Are you focusing or intending to focus just on the climate challenge? Because we've got sort of the national security challenge at the moment in the Indo-Pacific region as well. So are you focusing just on climate?
With this group, we want to put focus on the climate risk and the security risk, because that can cause military conflicts as well. This group's looking at that. The other group I chair is looking at the bigger resilience issue. So we've been running workshops on that topic since the start of last year. We've had 160 people involved in pro bono workshops. We will have each of the aspects we're looking at done by about the middle of this year. We will then produce an overall report on what we think it is, and that will go public in about September, October this year. So that's the bigger picture. This one is really taking an in-depth focus on this issue because we don't think the political system is able to deal with it at the level it does now. Now, technology is important, but just saying here's $500 million for technology is not going to solve the problem, because it does nothing to help prepare for the inevitable change we'll see in the next decade.
The other one was the role of local and state governments in this. You obviously talk about sort of the maturity of the federal government, but local government and we spoke yesterday. So bringing the resiliency assessments and the risk assessments at a local community level and having local government do that, and they have been doing that, over the years as well, over recent times, and then pushing that up back to state and local governments and because again, Australia is a large country and climate will impact differently across the country.
You're absolutely right. Because you think about it, who actually does stuff? Well, the federal government policies and money, they don't actually do anything. It's the states execute a lot, and then you get down to the councils, they execute a lot. One of the retired military people involved in both of the groups I've talked about, he's actually down there working at the Shoalhaven Council, trying to help and support what they're doing to learn from the bushfires and COVID to improve their resilience. So you're right. The audience for what we're doing is not the politicians, actually. It's everyday Australians. How can we, if it's a family or community or the local council or state government, in federal government, what can we do to improve our resilience and how can we prepare a bit better? We want to have that conversation first. Now, that will be a lot of innovation is already going out there in the society. Let's support it. Let's talk about it. The thing is, as much innovation as you can generate bottom up, which is really important because you can see the result, you still need to bring together some design across the top of it to sort of have that master plan. That's what the National Security or Resilience Strategy is about. So whilst we're going to try and help that conversation, we want to keep advocating you need a top-down plan. Otherwise, your house, when you build it, to use the analogy at the start, it's going to be a complete mess.
The workshops you ran, how much does that include? What you had 160 people or thereabouts. What type of roles and backgrounds, diverse and across the country? Any specific? How would you kind of group them, maybe?
So what we did is said, looked at our society and we said, look at economics, politics, energy, the economy. One of the workshops was first responders and defence. So we had people from emergency services, the rural bushfire, people at the council level, people from defence, and said, look, let's see what you went through with the bushfires, and now you're trying to manage that with the risk of a pandemic, coming back again. How did that work? We've had the Bushfire Royal Commission, which was really good. And they said, there's no excuse for not being prepared. You can't say, oh, this is unexpected. So there's a lot of stuff we're saying, well, rather than wait till the next one is even worse and then we have another Royal Commission, let's take what the Bushfire Royal Commission said, let's take the experience of people on the ground and say, what does that next 10 years look like? What else should we be doing now rather than waiting for it? We had a whole sector on health, and the report on the healthcare of this group came out last year, and we'll be publishing again shortly, because what we see is we're reacting to the pandemic, but we're not preparing adequately for 2022 and 2023, because mutating viruses are not going to be dealt with very well by AstraZeneca. We need to have our own capability in country. So in each of these areas, from a range of experts, we're saying, well, hang on, what should we do differently to address these risks? Aggregating that up in the integrated report is already showing some common things. Our political business model, if I could call it that, the way politics works is everyone gets broken into stovepipes. You have a minister for energy and a minister for the environment, and those two don't talk too much. Then you have a finance and a treasurer. They're all in stovepipes. They don't actually coordinate much. And so where we see problems is because there's no policy that integrates the stovepipes. Everyone's doing their bit on the assumption that if we all do the bit, it'll somehow magically work when it comes together. Doesn't work that way.
Well, my observation of that is also government loves a crisis because that makes them feel like they're doing something and achieving something. They don't like preventing a crisis because they don't get the old adage of security. If security works, nothing happens, and therefore, why do we need security? And same with politicians in a like of, why do we avoid a crisis when we don't get credit for that because nothing happened?
We put $45 billion plus a year into defence. That's preparing for a crisis. Now, if we're prepared...
Well, that was my next question, though, like on that, that's $45 billion, and I'll give Nick Stewart a credit from the Canberra Times on his. That's an expensive way to sandbag, because we're using our defence in exactly what we're talking about, in battling pandemics, battling fires, battling cyclones, and that's really where that money is going, is it not, at the moment? So where's that defence balance go? And what happens if we're at war? Okay. And these things will continue.
So the amount of money of the whole defence budget that goes about is minuscule.
Granted,
and
yes.
When you get a crisis, if you're not at war, everybody's in the team. Get in there and do it.
Very cool.
I think the way they've used defence, carrying suitcases around hotels, is a little bit tacky. It's pointless. And we will argue in that case that these ideas of a civil defence corps or the Green Corps that they used in America years ago, we might be able to help the unemployment bit, not by putting people in uniform, but by creating an area that gives them skill sets to support the first responders, who are the experts doing their bit, or to support the society when you get a crisis. So I think we need a bit of that. But the actual percentage is fairly low. It's just that defence makes a lot of publicity about it. Or sorry, the politicians do. But if we're prepared to do and invest in defence for a big crisis, let's take the same principle and prepare for the crisis of what our society is going to have to deal with in the next few decades. This is not the last pandemic. Climate change and its impacts, according to the scientists, is going to have more and more impacts, not only through the weather, but on how the world works. We've really got to put a bit of priority in doing that, preparing, because yet they don't like a crisis, perhaps, or they like a crisis to respond to it. But when it goes wrong, what they all do is do this. Blame the state, blame someone else, or blame the opposition, or those poor hobbits, or whoever they are, living in the wine bars of the inner cities. I did make a comment the other day that the group we formed to talk climate does not sit in wine bars or cafe bars in inner city sort of vacillating. We have each decades of experience dealing with very complex security problems, and we're serious about changing the conversation, and we're not on either party's side.
Very good. Now, one last one to finish off. We're almost top of the hour. Is our role in the region, and you did mention the Pacific Islands, New Zealand, and the general Asia Pacific, Indo-Pacific, and how that looks for the regions, because we can't just close the borders like we have with the pandemic and let our neighbours suffer. And really, it is our neighbours that are going to suffer the most before Australia does. So what's our role in the region, and are you addressing that part of it as well?
Yeah, well, as a part of the broader resilience thing, I've had discussions with New Zealand government, defence and industry, and said, look, how do we team together to do this? So, for example, if you need a certain industrial capacity, why think about it just Australia alone? Let's think about it with New Zealand as a team. And if you want some manufacturing areas that might be at, say, a lower cost, let's start to see where we could give some industry into the Pacific Islands. The Kiwis were interested, and I said to them, well, have you had that discussion with our government? And this was a couple of months ago. They said no. So little think tanks are having the discussion. So you got to take a team. The same thing with New Guinea. What we talked about make sure they get the vaccines. You have to help your neighbours, and we've got to build a much closer relationship, in my view, with Indonesia, because the predictions the scientists are making about the impact of climate change on food supply, particularly for fisheries, you don't want to see your neighbour having a couple 100 million people with a significant proportion starving. So we've really got to sit down and say, how the hell do we do with it? We have the capacity in this country to produce a lot of food. We still rely on a lot of imports for some of the ingredients, but we've got to think about how do we use that capacity to help stabilise the regional neighbourhood. If we've got that, let's talk to the Indonesians about stuff that they've got that would help us, like fuel. How do we work together to deal with these crises that are coming? There is no point closing the borders and sitting here saying we're okay. It's because we can't function in Australia without the rest of the world.
Yeah, I suppose I could keep talking to you, but one was the term sovereignty, how important that is, and then I've got a closing question on so the term sovereignty and resiliency are kind of come a little bit hand in hand. Yeah, what's your observations or thoughts on the word sovereignty?
With the resilience study we've been doing last year, we appeared before 3 government committees. We were invited to go in there and talk about what we thought. We said, look, what we need is the idea of smart sovereignty. We'll never produce everything we need. So where are those areas that it makes sense to have a manufacturing capability in Australia, but more importantly, the right skill sets and experience in the people, the right training, the right research? So there are certain areas you need a capacity that would, in a crisis, allow us to have sufficient supply to allow society just to keep functioning. So that's not 100% of our needs. It might be 30 or 40%. So let's work that out. Now, for critical areas, you've got to make sure that the supply chains where you don't manufacture something are trusted. And that means they have to be transparent. In other words, you have to understand what the supply chain is, and you've got to be able to verify it. Yeah. So in medicines, I would say that we need a certain capacity to manufacture. That a resilient one means you don't produce a vaccine in one factory in one location with one production line. That's not resilient. You've got to have a couple of different production areas in case one burns down or something, and different types. So you work that out and say, hang on, right now we import 90% of our medicines. We want some capacity. Of those critical medicines that we import, can we trust the supply chain? And right now, you cannot find anywhere in public a clear description of where all our drugs come from and the chain they go through. The pharmaceutical industry representatives here in Australia say, well, that's intellectual property, won't tell you. You can find it if you go into New Zealand and see what they're doing. And the Americans have identified that as a huge resiliency risks, and they're doing something about it. In Australia, we just turn a blind eye to it. So there's areas, smart sovereignty and trusted supply chains. Now, other supply chains, like whether a T-shirt turns up or a pair of thongs, I don't really care about that. But stuff that makes our society keep functioning is what we've got to identify.
I like that, smart sovereignty, and I've been kind of resisting the term sovereignty overall. It gets thrown around way too often. Yeah. But I'll be coming back. Is it smart sovereignty? It's a good counter question. Yeah. And the last one, John, I just turned 50 yesterday. And,
you're a young pup.
Yeah, well, I can get the vaccine now. How confident are you moving forward and say, here we are, 2021, how confident are you that we're in a good place in 2050 moving forward?
We have the intelligent people, experienced people, and we have all the ingredients to deal with the challenges we're faced with if we're prepared to team and work in a different way. I have confidence in the Australian people. I've seen in industry, because I've dealt from large companies right down to SMEs and little startups, I've seen a lot of innovation and ingenuity. What's fundamentally lacking in this country is political leadership. I've seen a bit at the state level, but our problem with our federation structure is that every state does its own thing, and you've got a federal government level which, since the time, in my view, of the Rudd era, has floated around with self-focus. Unless we as a group of Australians say to the federal government, enough's enough, get your act together, because it's too serious to watch you lot play games. As I said, this week we've still got the PM playing games with the Business Council and insulting people. So as Australians, we need to say, we're voting you into position to help lead, start leading. Is my confidence that will change? Not very high, I've got to be honest with you. I've got more confidence in trying to get community groups, state governments, industries, not all of them, talking together about enough's enough. So are we smart enough to do it? Yeah, I'm optimistic about that. Am I optimistic about the political level? In some individual politicians and the younger generation, yes. In the older generation, in the current government, no.
Okay, well, look, it's kind of pretty consistent where I am as well, to be honest. And I think a lot of other people are in. My job is really about observing the market and the commentary, other commentators there, and much is being said. So look, I think kudos to cracking on with it and contributing as a group under the guise of the Australian Security Leaders Climate Group. And no, I do appreciate your time. And let me just bring up that last slide again, so I've got your correct title there and recognition. You can go to the aslcg.org. They're also on Facebook. Welcome to check that out and get involved. And maybe that is a good way to finish off. John, what is your call to action and for people to get involved or support or just watch out for more?
No, so let's start a conversation. When you see something, start talking to your neighbours, your friends, your colleagues, and say, let's get a proper realistic risk assessment done and require that of the government. Let's talk about what the risk is, and let's have an agreed picture where science agrees and we can have I guess, an idea of what the problem is that we're trying to address rather than hiding it. So let's have that conversation in public. Go and talk to your local member and ask them, why don't we have a proper risk assessment that's published? What's wrong? We haven't had one for a decade or so. So let's put that issue to your local member, because there's one thing I've found politicians do react to: pressure within their electorate.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, good call to action. Thank you so much. That's Air Vice-Marshal or former Air Vice-Marshal John Blackburn AO, retired, former Deputy Chief of the Royal Australian Air Force with the Australian Security Leaders Climate Group. John, I'll let you enjoy your day. Thank you very much for your time. Pleasure talking to you, and hopefully we'll talk to you again as well.
You're welcome, Chris. Good to talk to you.
All the best. See you, John. Okay, very good, and a good segue. And we'll link this interview with our Indo-Pacific series, our interviews with John Blaxland and the like as well. And again, I think we can build a series of like-minded individuals calling for much the same thing on national resilience. The report of the day is the NetScout Threat Intelligence Report. They've just crossed over 10 million attacks for the second half of 2020. That's a 20% increase year over year and a 22% increase in the last 6 months of 2020. So these are DDoS attacks, distributed denial of service attacks, and the 2020 stats are max size 1.12 terabytes, max throughput 581 Mbps. Let me check on Mbps. And then we've got 750 attacks. Large regional attack frequency is the MEA, so Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And then the last one there, average global attack duration 39.83 minutes. So there you go. It's the latest report on the MySecurity Marketplace. Welcome to check that out. That's the NetScout Threat Intelligence Report. Otherwise, check out the Cyber Risk Leaders magazine, some 20 odd articles in there, and you can support the channel with our Cyber War series. Slightly over time today, but very interesting subjects on cloud networking and climate security threats, and hopefully you've enjoyed it. We didn't stream on LinkedIn what happened, but otherwise we'll put this on MySecurity TV and it'll be available very shortly. Enjoy your weekend, and we'll see you on Tuesday afternoon.